All right, our guest tonight, this is going to be a very interesting interview. Rich Hoffman is going to be our guest. Rich relocated in, you know what? I'm just going to bring Rich on the line. His bio reads, he has done so much stuff. Of course, he's affiliated with MUFON. Let's go ahead and bring him on the line and let's hear it for ourselves. Rich, good morning. Welcome to K-Talk and the Fringe Radio Show.
Hey, good morning, Pat. How are you?
I am doing good. How about yourself?
I was enjoying the fact that you're a science fiction buff, and so am I. I love to watch those old flicks.
Oh, aren't they great? It reminds me of a simpler time, Rich, when things were simple and fun.
Oh, without a doubt, without a doubt.
Yeah, and I've a lot of listeners know I'm a big Godzilla fan, and I've been waiting for this new movie to come out. And then today it was announced that they're going to redo the Flying Turtle, Gamera, and going to do a big movie with him or her or whatever it is. So
that's remarkable. That'll be great.
It will. It'll be a lot of fun. So it's going to be interesting. We're going to get Peter H. Brothers on. He is kind of a world-renowned Godzilla expert. We had him on several months back, and want to get him on again. And it's amazing the history of some of these things. Like you talk about Godzilla, I didn't realize how many films were made and the history of the films, and it's just huge. The stuff is just gigantic, and it's kind of cool. It's coming back, and the young people of today can experience it like we did many years ago.
Oh, without it, yeah. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it. I can imagine what the special effects are going to be like now as opposed to back in our day.
Right. The guy with the I found actually on the Fringe Radio's Facebook page, I found a couple of sites. I had to do a lot of digging around, but I've posted them out there a few times. I found a lot of the behind-the-scenes pictures of the film when it was filmed back in 1954. And him walking around in the lot with kids holding his hands and taking a coffee break and a cigarette break and stuff, and it was just amazing. So again, talk about fun stuff. Anyway, your bio reads so great, Rich, and I'd like you to give our listeners a little bit of your backstory, and we're going to talk about MUFON and all kinds of fun stuff tonight. But let's hear it from you. Tell us about yourself.
Well, I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, and anybody who's familiar with, of course, the Project Blue Book and the Air Force project that was engaged knows that was in Dayton, Ohio at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I lived probably I lived at the southern end of Dayton, and, of course, I grew up there. And I know that for me it was like I had no interest whatsoever until about my age 13. I was in a science class, 8th grade science class, and I was late for an assignment because I'm also in the band, and I came over and they had passed around a sheet and people were supposed to sign up and do a 10-minute presentation on a topic that was on the sheet. The only thing that nobody put their name next to was UFOs, and so that left me with doing that, right? So the next thing I know is I'm now supposed to do a book report and do a presentation in front of the class on the subject, and that was like a couple weeks away. I half-heartedly went to the library. I think I found a book, probably it was something on the scale of My Trip to Venus or something of that nature, and and then I think I looked at maybe an encyclopedia and probably read something about UFOs in that. Anyway, I gave a presentation in front of the class, failed abysmally. Ended up getting a D on that, by the way. My teacher was well read on the subject of UFOs, asked me a lot of questions, and said, "Well, what about jets? And what about this that are chasing them? And what about this?" And I said, "What did you read?" I went home that evening, and I recall turning on the 6 o'clock news, and good old Walter Cronkite came on and started talking about the Lonnie Zamora Socorro, New Mexico case.
Gotcha.
And that date was April 24th, 1964. And the next thing I know is that I'm like listening very intently as Walter is talking about a case that has just happened, and I've now got my curiosity piqued. A couple days later, my aunt happened to take me to a bookstore that was in the city of Dayton called Wilkie's, and I went over and I went in and saw if I could find any books on UFOs. And the first book that I picked up was Captain Edward Ruppelt's The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects, and it said that he was the former head of Project Blue Book, and I, of course, read it. And here I am reading about this project that's located, just up the street from me, And again, my interest was suddenly piqued. Well, it was after that, Pat, that I couldn't get enough of it. I was watching everything I could watch. I was, collecting news clippings on everything I could collect. And I just mounted a complete, immersion into this whole subject of UFOs that next thing you know is I'm out at age 15. I'm giving my first lecture to an adult group on the subject. A little bit after that, by the way, Phil Donahue was at that time in Dayton, Ohio, and somehow he had heard of me, and I ended up being on the show when he was in Dayton, Ohio. And the next thing I know is now I'm going off into this media frenzy where suddenly I'm on television, I'm on radio, and I'm suddenly becoming the key guy to go to for UFOs in Dayton, Ohio, right?
Right.
And so, I get it, suddenly there were a whole lot of sightings in 1965 that were coming up. I would be running around trying to chase them down and trying to investigate them to the best of my ability, and I wasn't even completely skilled in all of that, but I had an interest in astronomy and other things, so that was helpful a little bit. There wasn't much in the way of me I wasn't hooked into any other organizations at that time, and eventually I found out, about NICAP and got into NICAP for a little bit, and then it was in 1969 that I learned, I was already, by the way, in 68 or something, 69, right around that time frame, I met some people in Cincinnati who wanted to form kind of like a UFO group, and we called ourselves the Ohio UFO Investigators League, and we got started, and we tried to build up case investigations and use forms and everything else, and it was shortly after that that I got hooked into a thing called the Midwest UFO Network that was being started up, and that turned out to be MUFON, and I joined up with them and became the state section director for the Dayton, Ohio area, and tried to do as much as I could to get case investigations, and had a lot of incredible cases over the many years that I was there. Went on to end up, I spent a lot of time, hearing and listening to Hynek, who was in town, Dayton a lot. Got very familiar with a lot of the other players like Stanton Friedman, Donald Kehoe, and them, and was starting to connect with them, and even Stanton Friedman later on. But so I was in those early formative days where I was meeting all these people, and we were talking, and I'd listen to their presentations when they were in town in Dayton. And then eventually I ended up making a good acquaintance with Hynek, and even ended up going up to his home in Evanston and met his wife Mimi and them, and even Mark Roediger, who was out in there, that later went on to help with the QFOS organization. So I was very much being impacted by them and their work, and then I would be out on case investigations, and some of the time I would be out on a case investigation. Here comes a Blue Book officer who's doing another case investigation on the same case.
Right.
So now I'm conducting a case interview, and then he is. doing the same thing, and we would start to compare notes. And then, again, over the years, I started to form a relationship with the Project Blue Book and Major Hector Quintanilla, who was in from about 63 on until the project closed. And I got to know him a little bit. I got to know, and in fact, they let me start using RAPCON, which is the radar approach control, so that if I got a sighting, I could actually call them up, and if it were like a non-classified sighting, they would actually let me know that, hey, we've got this in the area, we're tracking it, or we've got, a KC-135 coming in, or and we also had at Wright Pat a lot of SAC bombers, and you'd have like a whole host of even other foreign flights that would be coming in to Wright Pat. So you'd see unusual lighting and everything else, and we would, again, compare notes and things like that on. So in 1978, I managed to host the MUFON Symposium. I was pleased about having that in Dayton to basically now stick it in front of the Air Force's eye, so to speak. And I was pleased that I managed to get the Dayton Convention Center rented out, and we had about maybe over 3,000, between 3,000 to 3,500 people that came. That was the year that Hynek presented. You had Len Stringfield, who I've become very good friends with down in Cincinnati. He presented on his case retrieval work. You had Ted Blocher, and even Donald Kehoe, is probably one of his last presentations in front of a group, came to that session and delivered a presentation. So it was an exciting time.
Well, you were, just as a quick comment, you were in the thick of this when this subject wasn't as cool as it is today.
Very true.
I mean, back then, my hat's off to you, Rich, because I've said this so many times. I mean, and it didn't mean to interrupt you, but
Yeah.
you're with all the pioneering people of this research, in doing this kind of work. I mean, back then, a lot of this stuff you just, and I'd like to get your input on that about, how today it's more acceptable to talk about this stuff, and again, people being more open-minded and having more interest. But back then, I mean, a lot of this, it was not only pioneering, but you had to go out on a limb to discuss some of these topics.
Well, very true. In fact, just to point out to you that, I know that when I gave a presentation on UFOs to the United States Air Force at area where the Project Blue Book was located, and I would run into engineering people that worked out at the time, and I would be out there doing presentations and trying to inform people on the subject. And it would be interesting to know that a lot of people at that time were hesitant to talk about it, at least in the Dayton area. But boy, I would ask a question in front of a group of even the Air Force people and say, well, how many of you have ever seen or witnessed anything? And you might have a nervous hand out of the 100 people that are in the room. And the next thing I know is that during the break, I'm being pummeled with all of their stories about their sightings, right? So you would be trying to document all of that. One guy came up and started telling me that he had to fly aircraft out of Wright Pat in a moment's notice, loaded with a camera on it, and his job was to go out and chase the object and to film it and then come back, and when he got back, they would confiscate the gun camera that he had in the footage.
Interesting.
And so you'd listen to that story, and then the next thing you know, you're talking to somebody else that's basically saying, well, hey, I looked at this metal that I could not identify, and somebody said it was from out there. Or you would run across somebody that said, well, let me tell you about, like, my experience during World War II. And it would be absolutely incredible. But again, it's, publicly they would never say it, but privately they would. I was on a TV show that was in Dayton, Ohio on the subject, and as a result of, I guess, this one couple's confidence in me or something, they contacted me and said, look, we haven't told anybody. Now picture this, Pat. This is in the 70s, right? And I've got a couple that's telling me that they haven't told their story to anybody for 48 years. So now we're talking about a sighting, in the 30s, and they're telling me that they lived right adjacent to a pond, and that late at night they saw a bright orange object hanging over the pond. And again, they had not told anybody. Then a couple days after that, there were actually 3 houses on this pond at the time, and they said that a couple days after that they had seen it. Of course, they didn't even tell their kids that they had ever seen it, but a neighborhood boy was over mowing their lawn, and he said, well, hey, did you guys see the light out above the pond? And of course they said no. And he said, yeah, we watched this light over the pond, and we couldn't figure out what it was. And so they had experienced, and the little boy was talking about. Well, what about the third house? Well, we were able to track down, the owners of the third house, and I guess the man had either gotten a divorce or something like that and moved off, and the wife I was able to talk with, and she mentioned a story about the fact that her husband felt compelled for some reason to go out of the house. The next day, he was found walking around kind of like nude, and his hair had gone white, and he was talking about some sort of an object over the pond.
Wow.
And so now I've got basically 3 independent people that wouldn't talk to each other, right? And now you've got that whole event around the pond, and that was like in the 30s.
Exactly.
So it just goes to show you, and this is what we experience even now doing case investigations. So I think the reluctance on the part of a lot of people to even be willing to talk about it for humiliation. They're humiliated. Down here where I'm at, in the Bible Belt, if you would, I mean, there's always the stigma of you even mentioning it. And, you had mentioned about, well, people are pretty much open to it and everything else. Well, that's true maybe for some populated parts of the country, but, in some other parts of the country, that's not the case, and they're very reluctant to even mention it, even now. So that's what I've been experiencing, is that, in fact, I will say this much. Let me go off and talk a little bit more about what you had just said, and that was that I think personally, looking back now over my 50-some-odd years doing this whole UFO thing, that actually it was even easier for me to talk about UFOs back then, more so than now. And let me tell you why. And that is because you had a government-sanctioned organization called Project Blue Book that lended some credibility to the entire subject of UFOs in existence. And it's when the project died that credibility factor that we had went away, because they basically said, there's nothing to it, that there's no threat to the national security, there's no this, there's no that, and anything further to do with it is just a waste of basically time. And they wanted to get out of the whole world of the project. Well, then it was passed over to all these ground roots organizations that now try to carry the ball with a government that basically said, well, we're washing our hands of it. And now you had even more of that challenge. And then you had, you could probably look at the Robertson panel report where the CIA starts to get involved in it back in the early 50s, and you probably have just as much disinformation, and probably, CIA is helping to foster that through, disinformation agents and various other things to basically squelch and make this whole thing into a joke and tabloid fodder. So serious UFO investigation is basically struggled to be able to do what it needs to do because of the credibility factor you've got right now, where you'll even watch as, a good UFO story comes across in the news media, and of course the anchors and everything are sitting back there like, yeah, and they're wanting to make fun of it.
Right.
And then, in addition, now you've got the media, all the different TV shows that are on that are out there helping to either take us further into the mythology of UFOs, which can be anything from it's a conspiracy, it's this, and you're hit by the fact that the UFO has now shifted into it's not just a UFO any longer. Now it's UFOs, it's animal mutilation cases, it's abduction cases, it's everything, Right. And now it's everything, even paranormal. I mean, it's like, wow. I mean, back then we were dealing with just objects and an occasional sighting of some little diminutive type of beings that were next to the craft that would, upon being seen, would scurry back into the craft and then take off. But now we're talking about those same beings allegedly going out and picking up people out of cars, levitating them into an object, doing a medical exam, passing them back out, erasing their memories, and everything else. We didn't have that back when I was doing this stuff in the early days. That was even unheard of. And so the complexity we have then about trying to investigate cases compared to what we have now is like way far more challenging. And then you have to look at the technology that people have today in their hands. And you got people that are making CGI on the scale of George Lucas right now on their desktops.
Right.
So, I mean, I'm just telling you, it's tough today to do, an actual investigation on a case. But I will say this much, it's tough to do, but yet I'm sitting here with technology on my desktop that's incredible too. Because I'm able to go out and and this is there's this controversy out there. Well, you need to get out there and meet the witness and all this other stuff. I've done both. I've gone out and, in fact, when I started, you had to go out and do a case investigation and go out to the witness's place and talk with them, right? Because you didn't have a computer. You didn't have any means of communicating with them. You didn't even know about their area. Well, today, I can go literally and see their house, see their backyard on Google Earth. I can see what's above them. I've got satellite software that lets me see what's directly over their head. I can adjust the entire sky and get a view from their location directly, and what the sky looks like, where the planets are, where the stars are. I've got means of doing a whole host of things just from my computer.
Right.
And so today doing UFO investigations is actually far superior than what it was back then. I had to run to a library. I had to do a lot of legwork in order to figure out what could it possibly be.
Well,
and,
the one.
Go ahead.
The one thing, the one thing, Rich, is that, and you hit on a good point as far as people being able to do stuff on their desktop computers to create, what seems to be a real problem that I'm noticing today is that there are so many. I don't want to call them hoaxers because I guess it's a term we could use, but there's so many people that want to throw disinformation out there, and there's so many people that put these movies on YouTube that now people get confused. The general public, at least, they get confused because, again, you've got people capturing real sightings, real stuff, and then you got the guy out there playing with Movie Maker and hoaxing it, and it's just kind of crazy. It's discrediting everything.
It really is, Pat. And let me tell you, it's so frustrating for me because, to me, it's like one of those things where, and I know you've heard the Air Force statistics were always like something like that. Well, we've been able to identify 70% of the sightings, and 30% of them we couldn't identify. Right? Condon report said about the same kind of statistics,
Right.
And guess what? My statistics for Alabama and Mississippi, the two states that I actually am the state director for with MUFON here in now, and I know we jumped around on a time sink, but anyway, I'm in Alabama. That was about 30. I was about 30 to 35% unidentified, and the rest of them were explainable as well. But here's the challenge that I see, and you're absolutely correct. That people will look at this stuff that's passed around on YouTube, passed around on Facebook. They blindly accept that as being UFO just because somebody mentioned the word UFO. And I guess, it goes back to the terminology. It's unidentified, and the term is a horrible term, but, bottom line is, if you see it, you can't make out what it is, it's a UFO. But then in our vernacular, many of us old guys anyway, the UFO was always being one of those things where it's the unknown. We referred to the unknown. We can't figure out what it is. So, bottom line is that I want to investigate the unknown behavior. I want to know what those are about. And the problem is you have to get rid of the population of IFOs that are out there and other things and get those and set them aside. And where I'm saying is people are right now, they're watching these shows, they're watching these videos. We don't even know if it's been investigated at all. And it likely is an aircraft. But guess what? They're out there deducing the behavior that UFOs exhibit by what they're seeing, which might be a plane.
Right.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah, I do.
So now we say UFOs drop things out from the bottom of them, and it splits off in multiple directions. When in reality, what it was an Apache helicopter over a test field dropping out some flares. Okay? So now we integrate that into the mythology of the UFO, and then you got everybody out there. If you, as a ufologist, have been studying it for a long time, make a point that that's not what UFOs do. Suddenly, I am the debunker, or I'm out discrediting what UFOs do.
Right. No,
and that's terrible.
It's just, there's so much more in the mix. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Fringe Radio Show. Our guest tonight, Rich Hoffman. Rich, again, it's an honor to have you here tonight. Thank you so much for staying up late and being here.
Hey, no problem. I'm looking forward to it, and having a chat with you is definitely an honor on my part.
Well, thank you. So let's pick back up before the commercial. We were talking about the disinformation and people, the hoaxers and stuff.
Yep. Well, that's definitely a challenge. I will say this much, that if I look at my statistics for the cases that I handled in Mississippi and Alabama both, as far as hoaxes were reported to MUFON that we actually had to investigate, it was probably less than 1%. So what I'm trying to say there, the people that reported the cases, anyway, were very serious and wanted to be able to report something because they were very confused by what they saw. And so that's usually about the statistic that you're going to cross with hoaxes that are reported. Now, on the internet, in that world, that's a whole other story. And again, and I'm sure you must have seen it, but there's a lot of that CGI stuff that's passed around again on Facebook, and again, you've got people that are passing around video clips or something, and
sure.
And the problem, and here's where I'm at with a lot of photographs and everything else. To me, and you'll appreciate what I'm saying, the testimony is the most important thing that we can have. The secondary, things that we get, like photos or radar or any of the other stuff, are supportive evidence to substantiate the testimony.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
So if I have somebody passing around a photo and I don't have the testimony, I just basically ignore it. And and I just don't jump into analyzing photos that are passed around without that testimony either. So I just encourage people that are out there to question everything, and ask for that kind of thing so that they can really understand what's going on, because you'll find out if you actually have the testimony and you actually did the investigation, there's a next-door military air base or something, and they're doing something over there, and you don't get that aspect of the story.
Exactly. No, exactly.
So anyway, that's where I'm at, and I really am a solid investigator. I like to investigate, and that's primarily where my focus has been over my 50 years, is being out there talking to people and investigating cases and analyzing what could this possibly be. And I'm excited that, like right now, I'm on a science review board subgroup that is going through all of the MUFON cases on a month-by-month basis to determine what's going to be the top 10 cases of the year. And actually, I've got 2 of those so far that have been nominated, one in Alabama and one in Mississippi. And it's largely because of the investigative work in analyzing the case, I think. In a case in Mississippi, as a pilot who was paced by an object that came up underneath his wing, and he was at about 2,500 feet. He was flying at about 140 miles per hour down near Picayune, Mississippi. He had taken off from Slidell, and he was on a northward track, and this was on April 13th of last year. About 3:30 in the afternoon is when the event happened, and, don't you know, we were able to get 6 sets of radar data from different sites, and one of them actually shows the object moving around right where he was. And, in fact, it's doing incredible maneuvers on the track. I mean, I'm talking about, we've got his plane heading north. We've got the object that's around him making a 120-degree turn, going from like 190 miles an hour instantly down to 60 within one blip of the radar. So, I mean, there is this evidence that we're starting to collect, but you have to do that legwork to be able to get it, and I'm excited that it's like one of the cases I investigated. So, I mean, that's pretty neat. But that's where I'm at, Pat. I've also had the opportunity when I was in Dayton back in the 70s to have investigated a case in Carrollton, Ohio, where a farmer had, there were a lot of sightings that were going on in the area of UFOs the night before, and the next day the farmer comes out and his wheat crop, and in the middle of it is a 70-foot in diameter area where there's no wheat. And when you go actually out to take a look at that and to do the investigative work that we did, I was with Larry Moyers and a whole bunch of other doing the soil analysis, and guess what? It's been baked 2 feet in the ground. All the wheat roots are gone, there's a central depression, and then you go out in any direction, it gets a little bit like you start to see a little bit of the roots underground on the outer perimeter. You have a rotational pattern around the edge where you have a little bit of these stems up, and then you have 70-foot in diameter area where there's puffed wheat around the perimeter. And you look at that and you say, okay, I know of nothing that can explain that or how that was done. And you're left with one of those aha moments of, instead of seeing one, you say, well, they're real because guess what? I just had that incredible experience.
Right. Go ahead.
That's where I'm at.
You know, the one thing I wanted to ask you is, have you, MUFON seems to have been very, I mean, for so long they've been involved with sightings, and have they moved a little bit deeper, or your group, have you moved a little bit deeper into the abduction scenarios?
To me, it's like it's almost like if I were to look at these two different things, and I mentioned it a little bit. It's almost like there's two different kinds of things going on here. And let me point out to you, I mentioned to you that the little beings would always scamper and get on board the craft, right?
Right.
That was the typical experience that you had with an actual observed object, that you would have the object being seen by the witness and the little guys or whatever they were that would scamper back into the craft, and you that was it. Now you have this whole other psychological manifestation, if you would, or whatever that phenomena is that we call abduction scenarios, in which there's people that are having these incredible transpersonal experiences of being in their beds, for example, in some cases, and the next thing you know, moving through walls and going out into a craft and being, having these examinations. And where we struggle is, was there actual UFO sighting, or was this all somehow this person experiencing this who is seeing a sighting? In other words, is it, how do I put it? Is this a real phenomena, or is this a paranormal phenomena? I mean, right. I'm not trying to say that I believe necessarily that UFOs are not also kind of have a little bit of paranormal aspect. I mean, we can't deduce where they're from, whether they are objects that are moving in and out of a different dimension, and here they are, and then they pop back away, and that's how they're hiding. Or we can't deduce and explain whether or not the extraterrestrial hypothesis is valid. We haven't been able to, look at I call it the always been here hypothesis, meaning that they've been here longer than we have, and they've always been here. And, and then there's the future. They're from the future, coming back in time. Well, there's multiple hypotheses. I mean, who knows? But it seems to be that I don't experience anywhere. I mean, I don't experience abduction cases at all. In the 70s, I had a lot of animal mutilation cases, and in the 80s, we had animal mutilation cases. And the question was, are these connected to UFOs or not? But as far as the abduction cases, what you have now are somebody will submit you a photo of their arm, and they say, well, here's a scar on my arm. And then you'd ask, well, okay, have you ever had a UFO experience? I mean, is there anything else you can tell me about that scoop? Or no, but I think that I've been taken aboard and I'm an abductee, right? And so they've already either been watching a show or they've accepted that that's what it is, and that's, and you know how I told you that, you could explain probably 70 to 80% of the cases of UFO reports. I think the same applies to the abduction phenomenon.
Well, and I think too, Rich, that the whole paranormal thing, though, everything, I tend to believe also that I think it is all interconnected in some way, shape, or form.
Sure. Well, it may be. I mean, it may be that the Bigfoot that seemingly eludes us, is bopping in and out from a different dimension, too, right?
Exactly.
And that the objects we're seeing in the sky are from a different dimension. And the crop circles that we're experiencing are from a different dimension. I think where we struggle, and where we struggle is we've got all these competing hypotheses, and we're not eliminating any of them.
Right.
They still hang out there to the point where, you know as well as I do, the most common phrase is that these are extraterrestrials, right?
Right.
Well, that automatically puts them out into outer space, right? Well, what about, interdimensionals, or whatever, So we really don't focus on these hypotheses enough, I think.
Well, the whole field of ufology, I mean, it is so diverse. There is so many different things. We had Grant Cameron in the studio here just a few weeks ago. He came up here and had him on the show, and of course he has just done amazing work since 1975, and has put so much time and effort into his research. And of course, he's written his book. He's interviewed the presidents. He's looked at all these different cases. And now he's changing everything. He's kind of going 90 degrees and really starting to look into not necessarily the abduction scenarios, but kind of trying to. He has some theories, but it's more of people that are seeing these things and experiencing these things. Is there something unique about these individuals? Is there something that this scenario? Is there something unique about these individuals, or something that has happened to them in their past that is causing them to see things? Again, it's so wide, and it's been rehashed so many times, and I get exactly what you're saying, and that kind of spins back to what we were talking about a little while ago about the hoaxers. We're trying to grasp it, and we don't need any more garbage thrown into the can. We want to start to remove stuff and try to narrow it down. But I don't know. It is such a huge bite to take. I've got to take an NBC News break. Can we keep you around for another go around?
Oh, sure.